been told about Jesus' invitation, that he loves you and has a wonderful plan for your life, that if you pray a certain prayer, you will go to heaven when you die, that if you commit to following him, you won't have any more problems in your life. I don't know what you've been told, but if you're like most, it was abbreviated or completely misrepresented. The real invitation is aggressive, it's bold, and it takes a healthy dose of God's power coupled with human effort. But it's also for now, not later. Character transformation, not behaviour modification. Jesus invites you to attune your character to his, to possess a heart and life like his. Nobody is saying you can earn it. It'll take God's grace. Nobody is saying it'll be easy. It'll take hard work. But what if you really could attune your character to his, and in doing so, discover a whole new way of being human? If your life feels unmanageable, Jesus thinks he can help.
So speaking of Australians, we learned this week that Kate's paperwork and thus the site visit will come from Butte, Montana, which is good news. Don't ask me why there's a immigration office in Butte, Montana. Wouldn't think there's been many since the mine closed, but nonetheless, we're not complaining. That's great news, and so we're hoping that we can get that scheduled this week. Also on the Kate front, if you're kind of out of the loop on this, if you're a guest, our music arts person who's going to come lead our music arts department is a native of Sydney, Australia, and so we're working on a religious visa for her. She also emailed me this week that she broke her thumb playing sport, which I was like, well, which one? But apparently in Australia, you just say sport. So I don't know which one, but she's in a splint or whatever that's called on your thumb. I don't know what that's called. But in some kind of a splint for 6 weeks. And so I went, oh, well, we're probably not going to have her till middle of June anyway, so, oh well. Actually, I'm sure she's asking that you pray for her on all that. If you weren't with us or haven't been with us through the course of this series, we started a series on Easter Sunday called Attuned, and really we started by asking this potentially pretentious question of, well, like, what's Jesus' invitation? What's his offer? Well, what is he making available to us? And what we quickly talked about is that when you examine the scriptures, what you see is a very holistic teaching from Jesus, that Jesus, far from giving us an invitation to avoid hell or anything that's purely futuristic or even just purely based upon in or out type of language, what Jesus said was, hey, I've got this completely new way to approach life. In C.S. Lewis's words, a completely new way to be human. And what we observed in those opening weeks was that the people who gravitated to Jesus were in fact broken people. It's been well communicated. You know, it was the prostitutes and tax collectors and the cast-offs of society. And what we noted was that Jesus appealed to people, not that he appealed exclusively to the broken of the broken, but he appealed to people who came to the humble realization that they weren't capable of managing their own lives, that they needed help navigating life, that marriage and life and finances and jobs and all those things were overwhelming, and thus the reason that there were the droves around him and the reason that the large volume of those were among the most broken was because it's the broken who are humble enough to recognize, like, man, my approach to life isn't working. And then what we observed is that when you get to that point in his teaching, and what we've been working through is the Sermon on the Mount, which is his longest recorded sermon in the Bible, that when you get into, okay, Jesus, so you got me, you got my attention, like, so help me, what do you bring to the table? What we noted is that Jesus wasn't all that interested in behavior modification. He wasn't all that interested in our behavior at all. What he was interested in was character transformation. That in fact, one of his more common illustrations in the text was that of a tree and its fruit. And he would say, listen, you would never go to an orange tree and expect to get an apple. And you never go to an apple tree and expect to get an orange. Like, no. A fruit is simply a natural byproduct of the core makeup of the tree. And so when you look at Jesus' teaching, and some of us, this hasn't been our experience growing up, or it hasn't been our experience in our limited church experience, but he's not into modifying behaviors. He's into transforming the core, the heart, what in our culture today we would most commonly call our character. And from there, what you see in the latter half of chapter 5 of the book of Matthew is he offers this compelling picture of who you can be should you attune your character to his. Oftentimes we treat those different passages as new rules to obey, like Jesus goes, they had their rules, I got mine, I'm Jesus, mine are better. That's not what he's doing. What he's doing is illustrating the character that you can have when in fact you begin to attune your life to God. Now, of course, that takes God's grace. And of course, that takes our effort. Jesus talks a lot about the kingdom of God. What he's saying is when you live in the kingdom, you use your space, your power, your opportunity with my character, like it's my presence, my character, all working inside the sphere, the realm of your domain. And so Jesus, he talks about the type of person you'll be with regard to anger, with regard to relational conflict and frustration. And I think the reason why he talks about anger first isn't because it's intended to be an exhaustive list, but I do think he realizes that, man, if there's one thing we all have in common, it's frustration and our reaction to it. And so he says, no, with my character, you'll respond to anger this way. And then he moves on to sexuality, and he says, listen, this is this beautiful gift from God, but I'm here to tell you that it can wreak havoc on your life. And so he begins to paint how God's character handles sexuality. And then the parts that we didn't talk about, and if you're not reading along in the sermon with us, or if you're not reading the Divine Conspiracy, the book as we go, that the part where Jesus begins to talk about our words and how the character of God uses language differently, not to manipulate or control or shame, but to speak life and to say things how they are. It's brilliant. In fact, small segue, if you're not reading this book, and it became aware to me last week that there's several of you who aren't reading it because we overplayed how difficult it is, and it is difficult. But I would venture to say that if the only thing you do is read chapter 5, which is where Dallas Willard unpacks Matthew chapter 5 and the character of God stuff, you'll be glad you did. And it's not difficult to access at all. A woman came up to me after the last service, and she was literally bawling, saying, like, chapter 5, it's wrecking me. It's very in-depth, very challenging. And I'll just say this, even though I sound like an infomercial. Like, if you buy the book, having not bought it so far, and you read chapter 5 and you go like, I don't get it, still hate it, wish I wouldn't have bought it, we'll buy it back from you. I just really think chapter 5 can be that valuable to you. Other thing is, if you started reading the book with us and you got lost on page like IX, like before the book even started, I realize it's a difficult read. So here's one of the things I couldn't say to you when we started the series because it wouldn't have worked with the programming of the series. But the first time I read the book, I tried several times, couldn't get through chapter 2. Like, what is this guy saying? Like, Earth, Dallas Willard, like, what are you talking about? Actually, the first time I read it, I just started in the first time I got through it, I started in chapter 4, which is the Beatitudes section, and looped around that way. And when you get back to 1, 2, and 3, you go like, oh, why didn't he just say it? So you might consider that if you're getting frustrated with the book. We have them there should you want one. In chapter 6, there's a transition. And all of that kind of brings us to chapter 6. And I just want to read the first part of the first verse, and then we'll go on. Jesus says this in chapter 6, be careful. So there's a transition here. He's went from this compelling picture to saying, be careful. Be careful what? Be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others to be seen by them. So again, picture the scene. Jesus is sitting on the hillside because that's what the Jewish teachers did. The people are standing. He's just told a bunch of cast-offs and a bunch of people that didn't measure up and a bunch of people who didn't line up in the Jewish culture and the Jewish religious system. Listen, you're blessed. Why? Because the kingdom of God is available to you in new and refreshing ways, not because of who you are or what you've done or your own merit or lack thereof, but because of God and his grace and his Holy Spirit coming to help attune your character to minds. You are blessed. And he offers this compelling picture of who we can be. And then having offered that picture and hopefully sparked this desire for new character, he says, be careful. Be careful. Be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others to be seen by them. If you're going to sleep through this morning, please just hear this, because Jesus' warning, I think, is at the very center of most of our religious experience, our spiritual experience, our Jesus experience. Because what he's saying is this: you can become so in love with character and having good character that the actual goal shifts from actually having character to being known as a person who has character. The warning is very simple, that a sure way to sabotage your character is to strive to be known for it. And it's kind of ironic, and it's very subtle, and I hope what I can do this morning is demonstrate how that's been your experience too, on the receiving end or even in your own life. That you can become so enamored with doing good and being good that you actually cease to care whether or not you are good, cease to care whether or not you're doing good, and care far more about your community and the people around you thinking you're good and thinking that you do good. Picture the emotion that comes with attending a wedding ceremony. Even the wedding ceremony, the couple that you feel best about. I mean, we all know there's some of them we go like, I don't know, this is going to be a train wreck. And then there's some of them you go like, I think these ones got a shot. This could be good. Think about how you just emotionally take it in. Because there's a tension there, I think. And isn't the tension that on one hand you are celebrating and you are recognizing that this is an incredibly powerful moment, that this is an important moment, this is the culmination of a lot of great choices being made, and you're happy for them and you're excited for them and you're going, yeah, this is awesome. And then, isn't there also a tension that kind of goes, I don't think they know what they're in for. Not in the like best man kind of like should never get married kind of way, not in that way, but in the way that says, listen, you are now susceptible to a new set of challenges and obstacles and temptations that you couldn't even have appreciated before this, but they're real and they're imminent and they're powerful. There's this like, I think it's what J.R.R. Tolkien does so well in his writing, because right, the Hobbit, just as he passes through one region that comes with its own unique challenges and obstacles, just as he overcomes those, he moves into this new region that comes with new obstacles and new challenges and new temptations, and they get progressively more dangerous. I think that's what Jesus is saying here. Or think of those of you that are fans of sport. I like to call them sports. Even better, I like to call them football and baseball and basketball. But like the guy gets drafted, and if you're a fan of a team, say the Raiders, and they haven't had a first-round pick that's done anything in decades, you know that there's a tension that comes with being the first-round draft pick. Like, yeah, good job, lots of accomplishment, way to go. Yes, we should celebrate that. And the work's just getting started. There's a whole new set of temptations. Or in business, the guy who gets the promotion. I mean, on the one hand, yeah, we celebrate that. And on the other hand, we go, oh boy, wouldn't want to be you. Whole new level of challenges. We could say it financially within art. And in music, the person gets the record deal, they get to that certain platinum level, whatever it is, and we know that with each progression, there becomes this new challenge. That's what Jesus is saying here is, listen, I'm so proud of you. So proud that you've received my invitation to attune your character to mine. So proud that you're about being who you are and serving the people around you. So proud that you want to serve Ecuador, that you want to serve Helena, that you want to be a different type of person in the workplace, that you want to be whole, that you're not playing a game. So proud that you want to tell God's story by the way you put a towel over your arm. But be careful, he says. Because oh so subtly what happens is you actually become more attracted to the reputation than the actual experience itself, the actual possessing of the character. You know something? Some of you, you're here very reluctantly because of this very reason. You were raised in a home that, you went to a church that, you had a neighbor who, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You were so turned off to Christ because there was somebody in your life who talked, but you got to know them well enough to know that they didn't really care about being it. They just wanted the reputation. Some of you have friends, all of you have friends, and you invite them to things and you're like, come to Ales, it's different. But their hesitation, their reluctance is they're tired of the shenanigans. They're tired of the facade. They've seen a religion that is all about looking the part and doesn't really care about being the part. Some of you are here by God's grace because that was your experience and someone came along and they worked with you, or they went to school with you, or they were a long-lost friend and they had a good experience somewhere else, and they've slowly given you confidence that it's not always that way, that some people actually are not hypocrites, that some people are actually pursuing a wholeness. They're not just interested in the game. Some of you, you're them. Some of you, there was a season in your life where it really was about your character. And what compelled you to follow Jesus was all the same things that compel these people to follow Jesus. You were in it to be changed. And over time, what you learned is changed is a lot harder than looks like changed. And I'm not saying that to be abrasive. I'm saying that because that's what Jesus said is like, watch out. Because maybe this morning the realization for you is there's this kind of predictable parabolic curve, and you're on the other side of that curve, and you've stopped trying, and you're frustrated because you don't experience God, and he sees far from you, and maybe for you the realization is you're there. And I think Jesus goes, we got to be careful with this. On April 25th, which was a Thursday, almost 2 weeks ago, this upcoming Thursday, I don't know what your morning wake up from bed habit is, but mine is I try to read for an hour and I try to go for a long run. And so when I first get up, I go put my toast in the toaster, and then I put the hot water on for my tea. Some of you are going, you are such a Sally, whatever, I'm okay with that. I've fried my stomach with coffee, and so now I'm a tea, and I have to drink toast to soak it up, because then I go for a long run on an otherwise empty stomach. But while that's all going on, before I make my peanut butter toast and drink my tea, I sit in front of my computer and do what I know I shouldn't do, which is sit in front of my computer right when I get out of bed. Terrible habit, but that's what I do for about 10 minutes. Even in the middle of summer, the first thing I look at is the Denver Post, denverpost.com/Broncos. Shocking as it is, there's always new information. From there, I visit stlcardinals.com and look at the baseball team no matter what time of year, and then I go to my email. And some of you are going like, that's so dumb, Adam, you shouldn't do that. And you shouldn't. But on this particular morning, at the top of my email list was an email from a friend of mine, a guy who mentored me from the time I started following Jesus till the time I moved here, a guy named Fred. I referenced him often. And it was an email indicating that a mutual friend of ours, a guy named Greg Cherrick, who was 43 years old, father of three, a 6-year-old, a 13-year-old, and a 14-year-old, and a husband, had died the night before of a massive heart attack while coaching baseball. 43-year-old guy. Now, context there is Greg and I started following Jesus around the same time. Greg is also a DOF, as we call him, a disciple of Fred. Sounds cultic. It's kind of an inside joke. We both kind of followed Jesus together. We both started a youth ministry together back in Billings. It was one of those deals where 5 or 6 years ago, he and I talked daily, if not weekly, and time happens. And ironically, the last time I talked to him was 3 weeks prior when he called me when another guy died, and he's like, "Can you believe it? Like, 50-something years old, unreal." So I get this email, and 43 years old. He was actually coaching first base, obviously started to feel ill, was one of those guys who had chronic pain and was a college football player, and so felt like hell all the time, almost literally, just felt terrible physically. Decided to turn, and this one was different. He turned to walk to the first base coach, and what he got out of his mouth was, "You're going to need to find a..." And that's as far as he got when he literally fell dead right there on the field. Kids watched, wife watched. Look up horrible in the dictionary. There you find it. I got to work a couple hours later, and I suppose you could call it a coincidence. I don't quite know what to call it, but when I got to I talk to Fred now for a half an hour a month. It just so happens to be the last Thursday of every month. April 25th so happened to be that Thursday. So Fred called me at 8:30 in the morning, which is our routine, and he's as sad as I've ever heard him, this spiritual giant. He was really broken, and we exchanged conversation and exchanged memories. And then he finished up the conversation by saying, "So Adam, Greg was probably closer to you than any other pastor." Love that title. I was hoping I was a friend, but you know what I mean. I know what he means. Would you be willing to do the funeral? And I said, Fred, I'll do whatever Darcy asked me to do. Geez, you just let me know. So he said, "Okay, well, I'll meet with the funeral home this afternoon along with Darcy, and I'll let you know." So Thursday afternoon, I got an email, and it just was Fred in a couple sentences saying, "Yep, funeral's going to be Wednesday. This was this last week, and she would love for you to help lead the funeral." Great, I said. That's Thursday afternoon. Now, I suppose I'm not unlike any of you. On Thursday afternoon, my Friday's booked. My Saturday's booked, my Sunday's booked. So when it comes to like finding space to write and think and pray and process, I mean, I can do all those things. What I can't do is sit behind my computer and actually get to work. And I knew that was the case. And so what's perfectly natural is what you do too, is you just kind of, right, you just start perusing memories, you start kind of paying attention, you start categorizing, how do I remember this person? And that's what I did, and took some notes on my phone. And it was Monday afternoon, which is my day off, that Teresa and I had said like, hey, well, let's just go sit in this coffee shop on Monday afternoon and I'll do some writing, and she'd work on Families with Heart, and that would be that. But first, I got to go for my long run Monday morning, which is my routine. And I don't know if this happens in the business world. I would think that it does, but by this point, I had prepared a great deal. And so when I get on a run like that, kind of like around every Friday of every week as I'm preparing for the weekend, like I can just kind of give it in my head. Do you do that? Like you just kind of give the talk, you have the phone call, you give the presentation in your head. It's always better, isn't it? Don't you wish that they could just extract your subconscious thinking and actually translate it to a script, and then you would just read that? Helpful, wouldn't it? Anyway, I remember exactly where I was on Mount Helena when I said the last line, and my last story was going to be to say to them, Darcy, Dylan, Connor, daughter wasn't there. She just wasn't there. She's 6 and's got some developmental stuff. And, you know, I would suspect that you're going to arrive at places in life for which you feel ill-prepared and a little bit robbed. And while I don't want to minimize the grief of those moments, I want to suggest to you that you know what to do because you know who to be. And as I said that last line, I know right where I was on Ambrose Trail in my head. What do you suppose instantly was the next thought? And then the crowd will think you're amazing. That was the next thought. And I visualized myself walking down the stairs, and I instantly started thinking about, and then people will come up to me in the lobby afterwards, and they'll go, that was amazing, you're amazing. And I caught myself. And I went like, "Blah!" Like I think physically on the trail, like, no, Lord, like I know that's not the goal. Like I know it's not the goal. That's gross. Like not only that, but I'm going to look like an idiot if that is the goal, because you'll just make me look stupid to prove a point, right? And so I had this like 30-second confessing moment with Lord where I went like, Lord, I know it's not about me. I know it's about them. I'm there to honor Greg. I'm there to honor this family. There was like 1,200 people there. Like I'm there to do justice to who you are and what you're about. Like I know, Lord. And when the dust of that moment settled, and a few hours later I started actually working on this weekend, it hit me like that. That's what Jesus is saying in Matthew 6:1. Like, be careful. Because the moment you could say it this way, doing good is dangerous. And setting out to be a person of character is hazardous to your health. And it's particularly hazardous to your character. And Jesus says, we got to work on this. And so what he does is he illustrates. Again, I don't think this is an exhaustive list. I think he's illustrating to make his point. And he says, so when you give to the needy, do not announce it with trumpets as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets to be honored by others. I mean, the text is so straightforward, it kind of doesn't need any translation other than to say, like, they actually did this. We do it differently. $100 bill, coming in. Like, I mean, it's different. Like, we don't have metal pans, so you can't do that around here with your coins. But what Jesus is getting at here is you'll start out doing things because. And if you're not careful, you'll arrive at a place where you're doing them for. Because it's right, because it's true, because it's beautiful, because it's good, because kids should get a good presentation, because the music should be good, because I want my neighbor to follow Jesus, because I want them to have a good experience, because we should serve the community. But before long, he's saying you'll be blowing trumpets to bring attention to yourself, and you don't really care about good, and you don't care about people. What you care about is you. And then Jesus keeps illustrating. He says, like, this will even impact the way you talk to your heavenly Father. And when you pray, do not be like the hypocrites. Like, you know now that this hypocrite word, this is an acting term, right? Jesus was the first one to use it outside of a thespian culture. They were people who pretended to be one thing on stage when obviously they weren't off stage. He says, and when you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the street corners to be seen by others. They carry on, they pray, but connecting with God is actually the last thing on their list. I couldn't help but think of one of the classic illustrations of this from our culture. I invite you to turn your attention to
Get your hot buns, hot patooties.
Wow, Dina, everything looks fabulous.
Well, I'll tell you something. It's such a treat for me to have a home-cooked meal like this. Dinner at my house usually consisted of everybody in the kitchen fighting over containers of Chinese food.
Oh, you poor thing. What, there wasn't enough food to go around, Greg?
No, there was. We just never really sat down like a family like this.
Greg, would you like to say grace?
Greg's Jewish, Dad. You know that.
You're telling me the Jews don't pray, honey? Unless you have some objection.
No, I'd love to. Pam, come on. It's not like I'm a rabbi or something. I said grace at many a dinner table. It's okay. Oh, dear God, thank you. You are such a good God to us, a kind and gentle and accommodating God. And we thank you, oh sweet, sweet Lord of hosts, for the smorgasbord you have so aptly lain at our table this day and each day by day. Day by day, by day. Oh, dear Lord, 3 things we pray. To love thee more dearly, to see thee more clearly, to follow thee more nearly, day by day, by day. Amen.
Amen.
Oh, Greg, that was lovely.
Thank you, Greg. That was interesting, too.
We laugh. Ever been prayed at? Right, like, hey, can I pray for you? And been prayed at instead of for? Why is praying publicly something that gives us anxiety? If not because it's so easy for it to be about this level of communication, not that level of communication. And see, Jesus is just pointing out what is a classic tendency, and he's going, you got to be careful. Even some of the most central things about your faith, you'll begin to do them for the way you're viewed, for your reputation, not for anything authentic. He also says, when you fast, do not look somber as the hypocrites do, for they disfigure their faces to show others they are fasting. See, bottom line is what he's saying is, and you've known this, if you've ever set out to be a person of character, if you've ever set out to attune your character to Christ, if you've ever set out to be transformed in who you are, you know that no sooner do you make that the goal than you're tempted to actually make the goal your reputation. And I think what Jesus is quite clearly saying here is you got to be careful with this one. You got to be careful with this one, because before long, you'll be the facade. You'll be the hypocrite. You'll be the parent or the neighbor or the pastor or whoever that negative experience was. Before long, that'll be you, and you'll be way more into the act than you will reality. I couldn't help but think of the classic Wizard of Oz scene.
Do not arouse the wrath of the great and powerful Oz. I said come back tomorrow.
If you were really great and powerful, you'd keep your promises.
Do you presume to criticize the great Oz? You ungrateful creatures, think yourselves lucky that I'm giving you audience tomorrow instead of 20 years from now. Oh, the great Oz has spoken. Oh, pay no attention to that man behind the curtain. The great Oz has spoken.
Who are you?
Oh, I am the great and powerful Wizard of Oz.
You are? I don't believe you.
No, I'm afraid it's true. There's no other wizard except me. You humbug! Yes, it's exactly so. I'm a humbug.
Oh.
So, of course, the question is, how do we avoid this? And Jesus addresses that, and I'd like to begin to echo some of that in the text. He says, be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others to be seen by them. If you do, you'll have no reward from your Father in heaven. I think Dallas Willard makes a couple brilliant observations of this, and the first one is that it does not necessarily mean that your good has to be hidden. Ever heard that? Sometimes that's what we say of, well, we can't actually send a thank you card. We can't actually say thanks. We can't actually celebrate something that's been accomplished. We can't actually point out good that's been done because, well, that would be that would be like letting your left hand know what your right hand's doing, which Jesus is going to unpack here in a little bit. And I think Dallas Willard is spot on when he says that's not necessarily the case. Like Jesus is not here, he's not in this to create a rule that says you can do this, you can't do this. The bigger question is, why do you do it? That's the issue. Now, in some cases, because that's the issue, it may be well to keep it a secret, but it's not a mandate. He's after our heart. He's after why you do what you do. And the second observation is simply this, that our intent is determined by what we want from our action. Like the intent is determined by what's the outcome you're looking for? What's the win? Like, what do you hope to see come from it? Because he says time and time again, so when you give to the needy, you do not announce it with trumpets as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets to be honored by others. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward in full. Like that's not so much a condemning statement as it's just a cause and effect reality statement. It's not this hyper-religious statement. He's just saying, listen, when you set out to impress people, well, God's a gentleman. And he tends to not force himself upon people. And so that's what you'll get, is you'll impress people. But if, on the other hand, you do things unto God, for God, because remember, Jesus' whole emphasis here is how do I walk in and live in the presence of God? How do I experience the presence of God? How do I live in the kingdom? Jesus is saying, well, then make sure your motives are to like rely upon him, to have him be near. When you do things for God, Jesus says, well, then God will get involved. Listen to how this continues. But when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing so that your giving may be in secret. Then your Father who sees what is done in secret, he'll reward you. He'll get involved. Now, some would say, like, well, right there, Adam, that says it's supposed to be a secret. There's a couple ways you could go with this, and I don't think we have to, like, fight over it because we can agree to disagree, but I'm of the mindset that can you really let your right hand not know what your left hand is doing or your left hand not know what your right hand's doing? I think the answer is no. Just like we talked about last week, gouging out your eyes doesn't really remove the potential for lust from your life. Cutting off one hand or hiding it, that's not really the issue. The issue is that it comes from a place of character, not from a place of earning, that it comes from a centered place, a healthy place, not a reputation place. What he's saying is that when your right hand does something, your left hand is unmoved and not surprised. You know these people. Like you heard that they did something for someone and they dropped everything and they helped somebody do something, or they stroked a certain kind of check, or any of those different number of things, and you know them. You go, oh yeah, well of course they did. Yeah, I mean, yep. Because that's just who they are. That's what he's getting at here, is your goodness should flow from your character. So ultimately, I think that I've just envisioned God putting his hands on our face and going, listen, I know you want this to deviate away from character. I know you want things to do and things not to do. I'm just not going to let it happen. Like, I'm interested in your character. I'm interested in the good that you do coming from here. And yet be warned, because a very common, typical path is that you set out for this, but you take a right or you take a left, and before long, you're right back in the self-absorption that Jesus saved you from. You're right back to sitting on the throne. You're right back to being God. Listen, I don't know who you've set out to be. I know that my conversations indicate to me that there's not many people around here who are playing a game. There's not many people around here who feel like they need a religious stamp in their wallet checked. Those people they don't end up here. Like what I know is that there's a group of people here who truly desire to be better spouses and better parents and better coworkers and better members of the community and better at their jobs and all those different things. And I hope what you're hearing from Jesus is this gracious, fatherly warning that says, be careful. Because there's a long list of things put out there by the government that are hazardous to your health. But one that's often overlooked is actually the pursuit of character. Actually doing good, it takes out the best of them. Listen, those people that you've come to resent, that have come to capture and solidify for you hypocrisy and religious hypocrisy, I think it's a pretty safe assumption to assume that they started with the exact same heart that you might have right now. They didn't set out to be a hypocrite. They set out on a path and they found that authenticity was a lot harder. But they had so bought into the identity, so bought into the vision, that rather than do the hard work of core heart transformation, they just started to play the game. And so know that as you resent them and hopefully you've dealt with your forgiveness issues there, you're really looking at yourself. And you're not dealing with anything that you're not quite capable of falling into. It's dangerous. This character thing is dangerous work because it's hard work. And I think Dallas Willard says it well when he says that the desire for reputation is all the more powerful when it involves the desire for a reputation of being devout. I don't know what good you've set out to do, but I know that the easy thing to do at these intersections is to quit. And to go, I've been doing that for myself, so I quit. Like it's this kind of self-punishing, almost over-spiritualized thing where we think that the natural best response is just to quit doing it. Quit on the team, quit teaching them, quit whatever it is, whether it's associated with you or that, like it's about me, so I'm just going to quit. I think that's the easy thing to do. I think the other thing that is a natural tendency is not necessarily to quit, but to quit caring. And you just go like, I was doing that for me, so I'm just not going to try as hard. I'm not going to practice as much. I'm not going to invest as much energy into it. I'm not going to prepare as hard. I think that's easy. In fact, if you're a church person, you know that, and sorry if you're not, but I'm not trying to leave you out, but you know that like big box churches, quote unquote, mega churches, they're often thrown under the bus. And they're thrown under the bus under the idea that because they care so much about the way things are presented, that they're by default outside of God's will. I would beg to differ. I think it's really easy to do a really crappy job and say, but all I'm here to do is please God. I think it's really hard to work really, really hard at something, to fine-tune your craft, to want to be the best at it, but to want to be the best not for what you get, but for what people receive, for the glory that's attributed to God. I think when you arrive at these moments, there's a tendency to quit. I think there's a tendency to just get lazy. I want to argue that the hardest thing is to do everything you do as though working for the Lord, as Paul says. To hone in your craft, whether that's your occupation or a team that you're part of around here or something you do in the community. To want to do it incredibly well, to want to be the best, and at the same time to do it with pure motives. That's what's hard. That's what takes discipline. Those are the types of people that God uses to change lives around him. Listen, none of us is above being that person. And I think Jesus says, I just want to help you with that. Be careful, because your desire for character can ironically destroy your character. And finally, I don't know how we deal with this tension without some level of solitude and silence in your life. I know those are often thought of as religious words, but I just don't know how you deal with the type of heart searching this requires if you're not creating space in your daily and especially weekly routines where God can just point stuff out to you. And you're going to say, yeah, I'm too busy. And if you're anything like me, you might be too busy, but you got a half an hour a day to spend on your iPhone. I'm too busy, but I'll bet you catch your favorite TV show every week. And I'm not saying that to be abrasive. I'm saying that because I know who you are, and you don't want to be that religious person. And I'm saying I don't think you cannot be that person without creating some space in your life for the Holy Spirit to talk to you. I actually don't want to close with prayer this morning. I'd like to kind of speak a benediction over us. So would you stand? As a church that's so bent towards mattering our community, we would be remiss if we didn't recognize that this is not just an individual temptation, it's on all of us. So may you, Narrate Church, continue to strive to matter in your workplace and in your neighborhood and in your community. May we collectively matter. May you be transformed as a person of character. And yet maybe you do that in tension with the temptation for reputation. May you be a person who strives to serve people but ultimately to serve God, who strives to be a person of character, but ultimately to honor God. And may we as a church continue to serve the community because we can and we should, not for what we gain from it. I love you guys. Have a great week.
For more information on Narrate Church, visit www.narratechurch.org or download the mobile app, now available for iPhone and Android.